Good morning. Welcome to New York Law School. My name is Ross Sandler. I'm a professor of law at New York Law School and director of the Center for New York City Law, and I welcome you to this beautiful facility and for this wonderful breakfast with the Chief Judge. I want to first tell you a little bit about some of the things that are on the table. There's the publications of the Center for New York City Law, but also a very beautiful history of the family court done by the Abbey Center here at New York Law School, Professor Carlin Meyer, the leader of that, and this is by the Diane Abbey Center. It's quite wonderful in its descriptions of the family court, and we're happy to distribute it here and give you a copy. Today, of course, we're very fortunate to have the Chief Judge of the State of New York, Jonathan Lippman, with us, and the topic is on pro bono and his really important historical initiative in that direction. I would like to, we typically try and acknowledge people who have come to our breakfast, and I thought today I would acknowledge those who have, at least those that I recognize, have had significant impact on the pro bono work of the city. One is my friend Bill Dean. Bill, where is Bill Dean? Stand up. He headed volunteers of legal services for 25 years, an amazing job of bringing pro bono services from the private bar. Michael Rebell. Michael Rebell is Judge Lippman. You may recognize him from litigating the CFE cases, perhaps the most important public pro bono cases in the state. I'd also like to recognize, because these breakfasts, we don't charge for them, we're very fortunate to have sponsors. One of our most important sponsors, Consolidated Edison, and the General Counsel of Consolidated Edison is here, Elizabeth Moore. Elizabeth, who prior to that position had a very distinguished career in government, including counsel to the first Cuomo administration. I'd also like to acknowledge Arthur Abbey, our chairman of our board, who is here and has been a superb supporter of this law school. Really, much of what you see around you is a result of his indefatigable work for this law school. And now I'd like to introduce our new dean. This is the first chance I've had to do that. Anthony Crowell, a friend for many years, who's now taking charge as Dean of New York Law School and has already made enormous changes in terms of just the energy and optimism and spirit of the law school, and I'm delighted to bring him to the podium.
Well, thank you, Ross. And as Ross said, this is actually my first city law breakfast as dean, so that's very exciting for me. I've usually been in the audience for many years, and I'm very pleased to be here to join you in that capacity. And I couldn't be happier that Judge Lippman is here today to join us. And as Ross said, we have an incredibly distinguished crowd, so it's a very important day for the law school and certainly for the profession as we launch a new statewide program. Our city law breakfasts are so critical to our civic and professional dialogue, and I think it's part of what makes New York Law School, as I like to say, New York's law school. And it's certainly an honor to have the Chief Judge with us today, so soon after his announcement regarding the new pro bono requirements that are in place statewide. And I can say that when I came into this role, expanding our experiential learning opportunities for our students and giving them opportunities to engage in pro bono service were among my top priorities. And I am very proud to say that the minute the Chief Judge announced on Law Day that a new program and requirement would be put into place, that our team here rose to the challenge and defined a number of opportunities for us to ensure that our students receive very structured opportunities and can develop a lifelong understanding and respect the value of pro bono service, and that's what we're doing. Just 2 days ago, when the new rules were announced, we announced that we were establishing our new New York Law School pro bono initiative. That pro bono initiative is going to be led by one of my esteemed colleagues, Carol Buckler, She's here today. And Carol is also going to be heading up our newly expanded Center for Professional Values and Practice, which will continue much of its important work and innovative work on helping the profession develop further and certainly providing new opportunities for students. We certainly appreciate the Chief Judge's leadership in this area, and I have to say I was very pleased and happy about the outreach that he gave to law schools, law school deans, and others in developing a best approach to how to implement his vision for this mandate. And I think we have a very workable solution and a very workable program that we're going to, certainly here at New York Law School, help our students meet and learn and gain very, very valuable experience. By way of a very short introduction of an extraordinary career, Judge Lippman was appointed Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals and Chief Judge of the State in 2009. His career in the court system, as many of you know, spans 4 decades, and he has shown exceptional leadership at all times as a jurist, as an administrator. He's received countless accolades for his work, including the William H. Rehnquist Award for Judicial Excellence in 2008. He's a graduate of New York University and NYU School of Law as well. And indeed, I think it is fair to say that there's not a single New Yorker who hasn't benefited from his life's work, especially all of us, those here today, who are members of this wonderful profession. With that, I introduce to you Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman.
Thank you. It really is great to be here and see so many friendly faces. And I just want to say, number one, how terrific it is to be in this wonderful building. Because I remember the old building, and on such a beautiful day, and with this crowd, and it's a great place. And I'm particularly pleased to be here. Let me make sure that we don't get interrupted in the middle of this. This would be good, you know. Okay, I think we're going to be all right now. This breakfast forum, the Center for New York City Law certainly shines a light on the most pressing legal issues of the day. When it comes to judicial decisions, legislation, and government regulation affecting the people of this city, the Center's publications and speakers are informative and engaging. I want to thank Dean Crowell and Professor Sandler for inviting me to join you today, and I'm really happy to talk to you about our new pro bono admission requirement in New York. I want to try and sketch out for you a little bit what it's all about, how we got there, and why I hope and believe that it will have a profound effect on the legal culture of our city and state in the years to come, and most importantly, on the least advantaged in our society, those who are most in need of legal services, and that is affecting the necessities of life, the roof over someone's head, their physical safety, their livelihood, and the well-being of their families. Beginning in January 2013, we will become the first state in the nation to require applicants to the bar to perform pro bono service before they are admitted to practice law. And I can tell you there is so much interest in what we're doing here in New York, around the country with my colleagues, because chief judges are beginning to realize how important their leadership is on access to justice, which to me is such a upfront issue for all of us in the profession. The requirement comes at a time when New York, like much of the country, is facing a crisis in access to justice. Every year, we see millions of New Yorkers coming into our courts seeking the protection of our laws without legal representation. These are people who are confronting life-altering legal problems. The threat of eviction or foreclosure by predatory landlords and lenders, abuse by a violent spouse or partner, losing custody of their children, and so many other issues that reflect turning points in their lives. And they include the most vulnerable among us, the elderly on fixed incomes, single parents, the disabled and mentally ill, abuse victims, and so many more. They are left to navigate a complex justice system and to advocate for themselves without a lawyer. So many of our courtrooms are standing room only, filled with frightened, newly indigent litigants who have no one to guide them through the process. Unfortunately, only a fraction of people in need are lucky enough to be represented by a provider of free legal services such as legal aid. In New York City, the Legal Aid Society, the premier legal service provider in the United States, turns away 8 of every 9 people that come to them seeking assistance. Think of the magnitude of this problem. 8 of 9 people the Legal Aid Society has to turn away. The impact of this on the lives of these unrepresented litigants is so dramatic, and on our judges and our judges in our courts, and even litigants who are represented by counsel feel the impact. Access to justice is not a luxury, affordable only in good times. It is particularly in the worst of times, now with the economic tsunami in this country, that it is absolutely the most important thing facing the justice system to make sure that there's access to justice and legal representation for those in need. It is a fundamental principle of a society based on the rule of law and transcends the vagaries of the economy. And for the judiciary and the legal profession, equal justice for all is our very reason for being, our raison d'etre. The rule of law itself loses its meaning when legal protection is available only to those who can afford it. Without doubt, this is the most critical challenge facing the justice system today. It has been a central priority for me as Chief Judge to tackle this crisis. Nothing is more important to me. The judiciary has an obligation to deliver equal justice to each and every New Yorker. We cannot hope to meet that obligation if we fail to take action. In 2009, I created the task force to expand access to civil legal services, chaired by Helene Barnett, the former head of the Legal Services Corporation in Washington, D.C., recognizing that LSC was being cut to smithereens by Congress. IOLA in New York, from $36 million a few years ago, gets $6 million a year from the interest accounts that basically fund IOLA. Since its inception, the task force has been focusing on the extent of the unmet need for legal services in New York, how to quantify that need, and has made recommendations to address the urgent need for legal services. Based on those recommendations, and with the help of our partners in government in the legislative and executive branches, we have been able to obtain critical funding for civil legal services in the judiciary budget over the past 2 years. And this is part of a template that we tried to create for New York and hopefully in places elsewhere in the country. What we do is we were able to obtain a resolution from the legislature urging the Chief Judge to measure the need and make recommendations to the legislature as to how to fill that need. We hold hearings. I'm beginning the 3rd round of these hearings shortly, in another week or so, around the state in each of the 4 judicial departments. We then, based on those hearings and the recommendation of the task force chaired by Helene Barnett, we then put money in the judiciary budget to narrow what we call the justice gap, the difference between the need and the resources that are available. And the reason we put those monies in the judiciary budget is that access to justice is not tangential to what we in the judiciary do and are dedicated to. It is so much a part of our constitutional mission to foster equal justice. And 2 years ago, when we had large cuts in the judiciary budget, we still managed to put into our budget and receive $27.5 million for civil legal services. And why, when we had an $170 million cut in the judiciary budget, were we worried about getting money for civil legal services? It's because it's not enough to just keep the doors of our courthouses open. If they fund us enough to keep it open, then what happens inside those courthouses and inside those doors does not foster equal justice, then you might as well close the doors and close the system because it doesn't mean anything. And that's why we can do exactly, and believe me, this was so difficult, hard to understand to me how we could, at the same time that we were forced to lay off 400 court system employees, dedicate $27.5 million to civil legal services. It's because this is what we're all about. And again, what happens inside those courthouses is more important than the edifice or that the doors are open. It's what happens inside. And that's what we're all about. And that's what our commitment is. It's a commitment in the courts of the state of New York to equal justice, fundamental to everything else that we do. And this year, we were so pleased, in a much better year, with our friends in the executive and legislative branches. We were able to get a budget that we could live with. We were so pleased to get $40 million in civil legal services monies from the state government. By far the largest amount of public funding in the country, but yet just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the need, the urgent need for representation for the poor, for the indigent, for the working poor, what we call the near poor. Beyond public funding, the individual efforts of members of the New York State Bar are also making a difference. There isn't enough money in the world to cover all of the need. So many lawyers in our state have embraced a culture of service. Their generous contributions of time and money help us to meet the fundamental need for access to legal services for the poor. Lawyers who provide pro bono services recognize that service to others is a long-standing tradition in the legal profession. Lawyers are in a privileged position, and that position carries with it an ethical obligation to use our skills and status to help those most in need. Lawyers enjoy an exclusive franchise to practice law, and they can do so much to ensure meaningful access to justice for disadvantaged New Yorkers. We can and should do our part for the millions of human beings who are seeking to secure the basic necessities of life through our legal system. These ideals are memorialized in our profession's code of professional conduct. The American Bar Association has long maintained that every lawyer, regardless of professional prominence or workload, has a professional responsibility to provide legal services to those unable to pay. New York's rules of professional responsibility echo the ABA's. Under New York's rule, lawyers are strongly encouraged to provide pro bono legal services to benefit poor persons, as our society has become one in which rights and responsibilities are increasingly defined in legal terms. But for all the valuable work of so many lawyers who do answer the call, it is not enough. The need is too great. The new pro bono requirement for applicants to the New York Bar emerges in the context of this unmet need for legal services. Think of how many people in need thousands of soon-to-be lawyers can reach. People who are at risk of losing their homes, victims of domestic violence facing deportation, or individuals who have been denied the disability or unemployment benefits they desperately need in order to get by. We hope to imbue new lawyers with lifelong habits. Performing legal work for the poor will give them a window into the real world, and contact with people so desperately in need of assistance cannot help but build empathy and understanding. We know that empathy for others is one of the strongest factors that motivate lawyers to do pro bono work. Lawyers are more likely to help those with whom they have a sense of common ground or understanding. Exposing law students to those most in need can build that kind of empathy that will inspire them to continue to provide service throughout their careers. The road to the new bar admission requirement began on Law Day 2012. On that day, I announced that New York would require that prospective attorneys do 50 hours of pro bono work before they would be admitted to the bar in New York State. And I have to tell you, there's so many here been involved in government, Liz and Mike Cardozo, and so many of us who understand the dynamic. I didn't take a poll about this, and I didn't say, gee, is this a good idea? I just did it. And the reason I just did it is because, to me, it was so fundamental to meeting the judiciary's constitutional mission of providing equal justice. You know, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, concerns about mandatory pro bono for all lawyers, law schools concerned, and rightly so, about, gee, they invest so much money in their clinical programs, how is this going to impact the providers, even who desperately need the help, saying, gee, how do we integrate these kids into what we're doing? I recognized that this was not going to be simple to do, but I believe that it's my responsibility to exercise leadership and to boldly say where we need to go. And I think, and it's so, these things are so interesting to, again, those of us who have been in government for so long. Sometimes, yes, you need this transparent process, and you need to, do everything up front and before, and then we figure, gee, should we do it, should we not? And sometimes we say, this must happen if we are going to meet our obligations. And in this case, as a judiciary and as a profession, this, I believe, is such a basic step. And that's why we decided we'll paint in the canvas later, but let's get this done. Let's put it out there and let everyone understand this is what's going to happen. At the same time, recognizing the complexity of the issues involved. And there really is, we had a lot of criticism about, gee, you're putting these kids, the least experienced kids, are now going to take these giant legal problems. Isn't that terrible? Oh, they're so overburdened with debt. How can you ask these kids to do something? This is 7 days over 3.5 years of law school and waiting for admission to the bar. And out-of-state students, oh my God, you might have to come into New York and do the legal service here, the 7 days. And 50 hours, so much, so demand. So, but all legitimate concerns, and it's easy for me to say, gee, we're going to do this. It impacts on all the parts of our puzzle. And so what we did is we formed an implementation committee to facilitate the implementation, and again, to kind of paint in the canvas. Headed by Victoria Graffio, the former Solicitor General of the state, and my colleague on the Court of Appeals, and Alan Levine, who is a partner at Cooley and a former head of the Legal Aid Society in New York. And the committee spent their entire summer on this project. They communicated with the State Board of Law Examiners. They convened roundtables, discussion, as the dean says, with all of the law schools. They met with the leadership of state and local bar association. They heard from legal service providers and government law offices. And they took in many, many comments from around this state, from providers and students and lawyers. And we had a national outreach. You know, the New York Times had done a whole page of letters about criticism, praise, what's wrong, what's right about it. And we reached out to the Pro Bono Institute in Washington, D.C., a woman named Esther Laudent, who's the head of that organization. The national, a lot of the national law schools, Martha Minow at Harvard and Chemerinsky out on the West Coast. We took not only from all 15 law schools, but took input from all the law schools around the country. And in crafting the recommendations, the committee took into account the views of all these groups, and they really listened, and yet always keeping in mind the goal of inculcating newly minted lawyers with the core values of our profession, of which service to others is so much a part. 2 days ago, I announced a new rule, 520.16 of the Rules of the Court of Appeals, effective January 1st, 2013, and it immediately applies to all first and second year law students. We listened to the law schools when they told us, gee, we need a little more time to build the infrastructure to get these kids out and into the different, hopefully, slots that will be available. So we made it to the third year students because they've already registered and they don't know exactly or didn't know what the particulars were, get a buy. And in fact, I spoke at all these graduations last year and said to the kids that graduated last year, you're the last class that won't have to do this. Well, I lied, and one other class won't have to do this. Prospective lawyers must satisfy the 50-hour requirement through qualifying law-related work. And what does that mean? That means first, obviously, the traditional pro bono area of legal service for the poor and unrepresented. Second, and thank you, Michael Cardozo, public service with the federal, state, or local government or the judiciary, because we had people like Mike come in and tell us this was so important and public interest was a part of this big umbrella of what one would call pro bono. And third, service to not-for-profit institutions. And we use the example that's got to be legal work, and it's got to be, it can't be just something good to do. And we use this example. You can, if you go and build houses for Habitat for Humanity, well, that's a great thing, but it's not legal pro bono service, law-related pro bono service. But if you do legal work for Habitat for Humanity, well, that may well qualify. So that's the distinction. We want good deeds, but we want you to sharpen your skills as a lawyer and to do law work, not just good deeds, and good deeds are great, and they should do that also. So we didn't want to make it too narrow. We wanted to make sure that there were slots available. And again, you can do it in these different ways. It's my hope that the great majority of the time will be in New York and will be to help the poor and the disadvantaged. But public service, pro bono, it's all public interest. It's part of a big umbrella, and that's certainly in our mind. And we spoke to, as I said, Esther Laudent from the Pro Bono Institute, and she said, boy, in her view, serving the government is very much under the pro bono umbrella. So we were consciously inclusive. It can include so many different things: drafting briefs or helping to prepare for trial, doing legal research and writing, interviewing witnesses, engaging community legal education, or assisting low-income clients to complete court forms, all of which, very importantly, must be supervised by attorneys. We don't want unauthorized practice of law, obviously, and we're not expecting these kids to, on their own, go out and handle a big murder case. This is going to be under the supervision of a lawyer or a law school professor or whatever it is. It can be part of a summer job, an internship, or an externship, or it can take the form of a judicial clerkship or, as we said, other governmental service. Can a kid who works at Cravath during the summer and does pro bono cases qualify? Yeah, they can, as long as the person that they're providing the service for isn't getting charged. As long as they're providing free legal services, it's okay if the firm, and we encourage the big law firms to get these kids out there. Half the time during the summer, they don't know what the hell to do with them anyway, and get them to do pro bono work, and it counts. About 15,000 people sit for the New York State Bar exam every year. Of that number, about 9 or 10,000 are admitted, only about a third of which actually graduate from law schools in our 15 New York State law schools. Another third are from law schools outside of New York City, and the rest from foreign jurisdictions. Because of that, we didn't think it made sense to require them that they must come back here to do it. Again, my hope is most of the work will be here in New York, because there's so many kids who may go to an out-of-state law school, but they come back, they're New York residents, they come back in the summer, they intend to practice here. So you can do it anywhere, but you're going to have to document that you've done it, and the supervisor's going to have to indicate, authenticate that that's the case. I think this makes sense to me. It really does. And we don't want this to be where the kids have to jump over, tall buildings to meet this requirement. Let's make it easy. Let's make it a very user-friendly. It also makes sense to use the existing law school infrastructure already in place to make pro bono service available to students through clinics and other opportunities. Clinics are the best place to get this kind of experience. They're supervised, they're already in place. We wish there were more slots, and I know the law schools do too. So obviously that's going to count. And there is a culture in the nation's law schools and here in New York that encourages pro bono work by students. And at the very top of that culture is the New York Law School Pro Bono Initiative that Dean Crowell announced this week. It really is terrific. I can't tell you how excited I am about it. It's just what we want the law schools to do, to embrace this as something that helps our profession, helps our kids, and I just can't tell you how happy I am about that, about the New York Law School Center for Professional Values and Practice. I salute you. It's fantastic. I look forward to working together on your program, and this is just the kind of thing that's going to make this happen. I'm proud that we're the first state in the country to take this step. However, as always, and I did do this even though I announced it without too much input, I did always say to myself, well, this is such a great idea, why hasn't anyone done it before? And that's always, I don't understand it. So, the bottom line, at least as I see it from the judiciary's perspective, is that all of us, the judiciary, the profession, and the academy, have not exercised enough of a leadership role in access to justice and filling the justice gap that so obviously exists in our nation. Particularly in these economic times, it is so apparent that persons of limited means desperately need legal representation that they can't afford. If we don't stand up for the poor, when there's a crisis in legal services in our country, no one else will. It is our mission and it is our responsibility. Requiring 50 hours of pro bono work from law school students was a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned, with the end result of adding at least 500,000 hours of additional pro bono service in New York, absolutely critical to providing equal justice in our state. And I believe it's infectious. These kids aren't going to stop at 50 hours. Once they get into helping people and getting the satisfaction that comes to it, I believe we'll get far more than just extrapolating out, gee, how many students in 50 hours. And I can tell you, when we did the press conference a couple of days ago, we had kids come in and talk about their pro bono service while in law school. And it is so powerful to hear these kids talk. I mean, nothing more needs to be said about why this makes sense. I also think, I mentioned it before, and quite frankly, that this is seen by some in the bar as the nose under the tent for mandatory pro bono for all lawyers. And to me, this is such a very parochial viewpoint. The next generation of lawyers must understand that pro bono service is a core value of our noble profession, and it is noble. The best safeguard for never having to resort to mandatory pro bono is to instill that culture of service in new lawyers at the very beginning of their legal careers, a spirit of serving others that they will carry with them throughout their years in the legal profession. In New York, the bar really has given selflessly, providing over 2 million hours of pro bono service every year, and I commend them for their efforts for those in desperate need of legal representation. And I have no intention of mandating pro bono service for all lawyers, although, as Seinfeld would say, not that there's anything wrong with it. Would it be a really terrible thing if every lawyer in New York had to contribute 50 hours of pro bono service to the poor and the disadvantaged? Wouldn't that be terrible? Oh, I don't think so. But there really are very legitimate, conceptual, legal, logistical problems in putting a working system like that in place. And that's not what this is all about. The point of this is that the commitment of the bar to do pro bono work must be transferred to this new generation of law students, to aspiring lawyers, so that service to others becomes a part of their DNA. If we are ever to close the justice gap, this is so fundamental. The bottom line is that the judiciary and the profession and the law school community must take the lead in ensuring that the ideal of equal justice is a reality here in New York and around the country. And that is exactly what I am trying to do, and exactly what New York Law School is trying to do, and I am energized by the partnership we will forge together with so many other people of goodwill to reach this noble goal. It is my fervent hope that the new pro bono requirement will significantly contribute toward that end right now and into the future, and I look forward to working with all of you toward that end. Thank you so much.
I would say this is the 105th breakfast that we've had, City Law Breakfast, and we've never had a more important speech. And we really do appreciate what you said to us tonight. We have microphones for questions or comments about the talk or the proposal. There doesn't seem anybody at the microphones. I'm going to call, as a law professor, you get to call on people, and I may do that.
As Chief Judge, I know too.
That's right. That's right. The judge has a mandate, and I get to call on people. This is terrific. Would you like to say anything, Michael? Michael,
unaccustomed as he is to speaking publicly.
I know. We're graced by the Corporation Council, the longest-serving Corporation Council of the City of New York.
Well, first of all, I want to commend Judge Lippman for this initiative. Pro bono is obviously very important, and you hinted at this, Your Honor, but I wonder, short of the mandatory issue, whether there's not other steps that might be taken. For example, speaking from personal experience, I know many government lawyers may have had the attitude, well, we're working for the government, and therefore we're doing our pro bono work because we're not being paid very much. I don't know, and of course that is true, they are not paid nearly enough. And of course people can raise conflict problems with government lawyers because obviously if you work in the New York City Law Department, you can't represent someone who may have a claim against New York City. But I wonder, if there's not a way that you could be encouraging government lawyers to find a way to themselves, these are admitted people who are working for the
Right.
government, to do more.
Yeah, the question was, if you didn't hear, is Michael, the Corporation Counsel of the City of New York, is asking, is there more we can do to encourage government lawyers to do pro bono, even though recognizing that there may be some conflict issues? And my answer is, and Mike and I were talking a little bit about this beforehand, is I think absolutely. I think it's a relatively untapped resource, and sometimes we make it very difficult for them to do pro bono work because of the conflict questions. But I think we can do a lot more. You know, the other area, Mike, where there's been a lot of talk about is in-house counsel, around, particularly in New York City, where we have so much of that. Often they're not admitted in New York, but yet want to do good deeds and would like to do some pro bono work. And Esther Laudentor, who I mentioned before from the Pro Bono Institute, got a resolution passed by the Chief Justices encouraging the different states to do that. So I think there are lots of relatively untapped resources that we have to look in every nook and cranny to find opportunities to increase pro bono. Because as I indicated before, we hope to continue to get additional public funding for civil legal services in particular, and we have a goal of getting up to $100 million of additional funding. But again, the need is so great that there's just not enough money. It needs the bar, and it needs the bar to be doing pro bono work, and all the different ways, whether what Bill has done all these years or so many others. I don't think we have begun to really get to the possibilities, and I think government employees are certainly one of them. Yeah.
Hello. I just have a comment, not a question.
Sure.
My son graduated college as a law clerk right now for a large New York law firm, probably going to go to law school in a couple of years. His firm encourages the law clerks to do pro bono work also. Even though he's not a lawyer, not a law student, but they say, you work for us, you should try to do some pro bono work. So, he can help people, any way he can.
Well, I think you raise an interesting issue, too. There's more implications than just the law clerks, the paralegals, in the firms. There's a whole issue around the country that's starting to emerge, which is what about, and the organized bar is, death on this and very frightened by it, can people who are not lawyers, paralegals, all the different incarnations of people who assist in the legal process but are not lawyers, can they be a part of this effort to help those people who can't help themselves? And it's, I think it has some fault lines and some dangers. You don't want people who do not have the ability to help people to go in and make things worse. But I think there's a whole emerging discussion around the country about people who are not yet lawyers and having them be a part of this process of providing legal assistance to the poor.
Well, you even mentioned, let's say, filling out paperwork. Any kid who graduated college, if he's working with someone who's foreign born, could certainly fill out the paperwork a lot easier. Because he can read the form, he can ask the person, what is your name, what is your address, where do you work, things, how many children
Yeah,
you
I think
have.
that the key is supervision. That I think all of these things can work if you have somebody, a lawyer, who has the skills, who's overseeing the service. But that's another area that's coming to the front and becoming an issue nationally. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carlin Meyer from the Abbey Law Center. One of the ways that the bar might encourage attorneys to engage in pro bono work is to use, particularly for attorneys in a particular area of law, which is a small area where perhaps they see the same judges and the same lawyers over and over again. There is a model that the Women's Bar Association of the City of New York put together in which attorneys volunteer to do 25 hours of pro bono work on a case referred to them by the judges in the matrimonial part. And that program is run out of New York Law School and the Abbey Center. I want to introduce Jessica Batt, who's run it for the last year. It's moving on to be run by another student. But what we have found is the attorneys often, while they commit to 25 hours of pro bono work, in fact keep the case for the entire case and do, as you suggest, far more than 25 hours of work. That's a model that, because of the great respect and awe and a little bit of fear in which attorneys hold judges, they tend to volunteer to take those cases. So we have a pretty strong roster of attorneys, and I just want to say I want to propose that as a model that might be followed elsewhere.
I think it's a great model. You know, another one that I mentioned that we've had a similar experience to what you have, we've started this attorney emeritus program in New York, which tries to get the baby boomers who are about to retire or are just retired to do pro bono work. And we asked them, I think, for 30 hours. But yeah, what we try to do when you talk about niches, what we try and do with that program is some of them are very experienced in a particular area the whole career but want to do something else. You know, and how do you figure it? So what we do is on the attorney registration form, we try to encourage this attorney emeritus. If they check the box or plug it into the computer, it'll automatically go to the legal service providers, and they can check it out. I want to work in this area, that area, the other area, but I need training, or I have an expertise in X area, and that's what I want to do. And we try immediately get them into the providers and get assistance. But I think there are lots of great models, just like you're doing.
One possible link with that program to the law schools is with a slight downturn in our enrollment. Maybe we have room for some of those gray hairs to come and take the classes they need to transition, and we could work out a way to do that.
Absolutely.
I should have said us gray hairs.
Us gray.
Okay. Hi, as Professor Sandler mentioned, I've been very involved in legal aspects of education reform. And I just wanted to make a comment about what I see as some of the possible larger scale implications of this kind of reform. You know, one of the problems we face in the schools in New York City and many other parts of our state is the impact of extreme poverty on kids entering the schools and the impediments that poses to their readiness to learn. And some of this comes from things like the mobility factors of their families not having permanent housing, families caught up in immigration disputes and stress that comes with it. I just wanted to mention a very interesting program in Syracuse, New York, where the bar has gotten together with the Say Yes organization, and they set up clinics in all the schools to help families with these kinds of problems. And it's had an enormous impact, I think, in helping stabilize the background for kids coming into the school. So if people in New York City and elsewhere are looking for new avenues where this kind of pro bono service can really go to the greater good, I just want to give this as an example. It's got huge implications.
No, you're so right. And we've had, at these legal service hearings that we do, we've had a lot of people from the education community come in and say how important it is that families get legal services so these kids can be in school, stay in school, access whatever issues or entitlements are available, and it's critical to keeping families intact and particularly to, again, keeping kids in school. So I think it's a very important issue.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
I actually have an answer for Mr. Cardozo's question. But while I have your attention, Mr. Cardozo, I want to tell you, I was a student legal specialist at the law department. It was one of the best experiences of my career. I think it's a wonderful program. That being said, I think for government employees, sort of the barriers to pro bono work is we look at the conflicts of interest law, we look at our annual leave balance, and we say, well, it's just, you know, there are too many barriers. For one thing, I've found that pro bono opportunities usually involve 9-to-5 work. So I would put the ball in the conflict of interest board's court and in the law department's court and in the agency's court and say, let's find ways to accommodate that, because I think you'd get a really good response from the agency attorneys.
Well, you know, I think that, not to speak for Michael, but I have the microphone. I think that that the second point you made, I think the conflicts, there are real ones, and there are ways to work around it, and Mike would agree we try and do that. But maybe there is something, what hit me when you raised the other issue about annual leave balances. We do make it difficult, and we do say in government, gee, you know, sure, as long as you do it on your own time. Maybe there's a way to deal with that the same way we were talking beforehand, where we do allow a certain amount of CLE credits for doing pro bono work. Maybe there could be a way to, on that annual leave issue, to be able for government to foster, you know, doing hours of pro bono and not, you know, take it out of your hide so directly. So I think it's a good idea. Mike, you agree, right? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I do have one question. I am currently signed up, for example, to help people sign up, well, fill out their deferred action applications.
What kind of
Deferred action,
Yeah.
immigration.
Yeah.
And my question would be, would something like that count with the pro bono requirements?
Probably not. You know, greater minds than mine are working on this. What we're going to do, and you know, we don't know the answer to every question. We had a student at the press conference say, gee, if I work in mediation, but it's in a program that's not run by lawyers, but I'm doing mediation of a certain kind, does that count? And you know, there are lots of nuances. What we're going to have is we have a 800 number and an email address that you can put all those kind of questions into, and they'll give you, and they're in very close touch with the appellate divisions, who are going to ultimately rule in the character and fitness whether what counts and what doesn't. So we're going to try and answer those kinds of questions. Law-related, under the supervision of a lawyer or a teacher, and we're going to have to figure where to draw those lines.
Thank you.
We have only a few more minutes. We have people standing, and Elizabeth Moore wanted to ask a question also, so just those four.
I want to hear Elizabeth's
And then-
question.
And I didn't want to ask a question. First of all, I just wanted to congratulate you. I read about this in the Law Journal and was very, very excited about it. I also want to say that I have an in-house law department of lawyers who are absolutely anxious to do more pro bono work, and I'm wondering whether there's a possibility of partnering with perhaps a law school, for example.
It's a great thought.
I think it's also, our lawyers love to work with young people, so I think there's a lot of win-wins here, and I'm hoping that perhaps I can have a conversation with a law school down the road and see whether we can partner with
I think it's a great idea, Liz, and you know, what's interesting, I was talking to this Esther Lawden, who's the head of the Pro Bono Institute in D.C., and she was saying the most enthusiastic people she has in the pro bono world are the in-house entities who are dying to get their people into some kind of program that makes sense, and that they've been just so wildly successful with the in-house people. So,
I have
a good
motion.
partnership.
Would the Chief Judge mandate Elizabeth Moore to speak to Anthony Cole?
Absolutely. Liz Buchanan always has spoken to whoever she wants, she could talk to. Yeah,
Or this side over here.
yeah. Sure, go ahead.
I know that not-for-profits and service to legal not-for-profits will meet the requirement. Are there any eligible not-for-profit organizations that are geared to providing legal services to, I'm going to say, small businesses? And if so, what are the criteria? I'm talking about the immigrant who's got a food cart and runs afoul of regulation. The immigrant who goes out and takes a city contract and has to deal with all of the difficulty of reviewing it and understanding or even protesting that he wasn't
Sure.
paid.
I think that would count. I don't know those organizations, I'm sure they exist, but that is very much within the mainstream of what we're talking about. You can work for a nonprofit. I think, there's an issue that we don't think this is something that we want to get involved with politically. In Washington, there's a big controversy as to the kind of work that you can do in terms of what is legal service and with government funding, what could go for, and they have this ban on the Legal Services Corporation doing class actions because they view it as a political statement. But what you're saying is right in the mainstream of what we're trying to do. People who have legal problems but can't, don't have the resources to deal with it. And I'm sure there are entities like that, but I think that clearly would qualify.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Judge, it may come as a surprise to the cynics in our city and state, but our students are very enthusiastic about doing pro bono work. And I'll give you a quick example. I've been working on a project where I will send students out to senior centers to do advanced directives because only 20% of New Yorkers have them.
Right.
It's enthusiastically endorsed by the Department for the Aging and working with me.
Right.
And at noon, between noon and 6 o'clock on Wednesday, before the students had seen the announcement for the rules, I asked for at least 5 volunteers to do this. By 6 o'clock at night, I had 12 signatures who want to be trained and will go out and do this. So the enthusiasm is there. These are the kinds of projects that students are eager to have when they don't have room to take a clinic, perhaps. And I think the students are going to really support this, and I thank you for it.
No, thank you. It's funny that you say that because that's been my experience too. They're the most wildly enthusiastic because they get it. They get what it's all about. And the more they do it, they get it even more, and they only want to do more.
A little requirement will help, but I think...
Yes, it doesn't hurt. We just want to give them a little love tap and get them started. Yeah.
Morning, Judge. Thank you for sharing about your initiative. Marcy Grigsby from New York Law School. I wonder if you could talk for just a minute about how the committee that's going to be implementing this requirement has maybe thought of or is planning to give nonprofits a way to get visibility to law students so that law students know that outside of law school externships and internships that there is a whole population of nonprofits that exist, for instance, through a centralized directory of some sort.
No, I think you raise even a broader point of outreach to make sure, building an infrastructure to make sure that there are jobs out there. What I've asked the advisory committee that made the recommendations to me on the detail of it to stay in existence for the next 2 years, to do exactly what you're saying, to try and assist in building an infrastructure where people understand that, gee, we have this whole new reservoir of legal talent that can be helpful, and how you access that and how the kids, access the different entities. So we're working on it, but I think building the infrastructure is critical.
And to that point, the New York City Bar Association has a public service network. I'm on the committee for that, and they, for about 20 years, I understand, have been matching practicing attorneys with nonprofits. So they've been trying to accomplish with the practicing bar some of what you're trying to accomplish with law students becoming admitted. So there may be lessons to learn from how that
Oh, definitely, and we'll be in touch with them. And I must say, the New York City Bar Association has been the most enthusiastic, forward-looking supporter of what we're doing. And you know about, Mike, 25 years ago when Sal Rockler tried to put in just a group to study mandatory pro bono. Was headed by Victor Marrero, who's now a federal judge, and they recommended mandatory pro bono, and the world, came to a stop once they did it. But the city bar, as much as I'd say maybe 15 years ago or whatever, they endorse mandatory pro bono. They're thrilled with what we're doing. And I think it's time for the organized bar to step up to the plate in a selfless, not parochial way, and follow the lead of the city bar that is concerned about our profession and all those people out there who need legal representation. So I think we're starting to get there. I think the bar is starting to embrace this, and they must, and we can't look at everything from the most material point of view, and we've got to be, thinking in the broadest a stroke. So I commend the city bar for its unstinting support, Mike was a former president, of helping those people who are the most vulnerable in our society. It's our duty as lawyers, and the city bar has stepped up to the plate.
We have a point of order here from
Sure.
our chairman.
Yes?
I don't know what's taken so long for this to happen. I mean, it just seems that it's clearly something that should have happened, and thank you for doing this. I wonder if you might consider also expanding it, or thinking about it in the following way. There are a lot of new graduating lawyers
Right.
who are having trouble finding.
Yes.
And at the same time, and I know when we talk to our new students who say, you know, there's a great need for legal services, but you don't get a lot for doing it in the areas dealing with the poor. It's
Right.
not a place that's going to make a huge amount of money.
Right.
And yet these lawyers are out there looking, they have student loans, they need to work. You know, the idea that you're encouraging law students who eventually will graduate
Right.
and be part of that whole thing is fine. But there's a group out there now, they're looking for work, and it just seems to me there ought to be a match between the need for legal services and the fact that there are so many lawyers looking for work. Now, the idea, for instance, that you get right out of law school and you've got to do continuing legal education when you've just spent 3 years full-time at law school, maybe you ought to say that for the first few years after graduating from law school, I don't know what the requirements are, but give them some incentive so that they're not just out there looking for a job, but here's a place to do something. There's a lot of people who could do a lot of stuff that are just not doing it because...
I love it, Arthur. I think it's a great idea, and I think that we should give them incentives, and we're all trying to figure out in government and out in the road what you do with these kids. But I think you know, they need experience. It's going to serve them well for the rest of their lives, and giving them an incentive during that period, whether it's the CLE or whatever, to get them into the pro bono world. You know, they'd be spending their time really well as opposed to kind of knocking around and doing woe is me. Isn't this terrible? So I think it's a great idea, and absolutely, and we'll see if we can figure something out along those lines.
That'd be great.
Thanks, Arthur. Thanks.
Well, this has been an enormously important day for New York Law School and for the state of New York, and we congratulate you in taking the leadership. And it's what I got out of this, beside the substance, was your personal passion for this, and just the way you presented it. It is really remarkable effort that you've done, and that you have an army behind you. I'd like to call up, let me call up our Dean, Dean Crowell. As he is coming up, I wanted to present you, as we always do at these breakfasts, a product of the scholarship of this law school. This is by my colleague Ed Purcell, Brandeis and the Progressive Constitution. It's a great book, and I present it to you with immense thanks for a really important morning.
I want to thank the Chief Judge for his incredible and inspiring remarks today, and I want to thank all of you who come here and are our partners. I am very happy to call you our friends and partners, and with this, together we will all help implement this wonderful new program and ensure its success. I am very happy also that we have a number of our students in the audience, and to help inspire and incentivize you, part of our project plan for the new Pro Bono initiative is to start with the class of 2014 graduates that we will be awarding the graduate who has exemplified what it means to deliver pro bono service and who understands the values and represents them the best in the class. They will be getting an award at that graduation beginning in 2014. So for those of you who are in that class or 2015 and beyond, you now have a challenge, and we look forward to working with you to achieve a terrific result. So thank all of you for coming. Professor Buckler is here to talk with you. If you want a partner, Liz, we can have a conversation. And thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next City Law Breakfast.
Sure. I'm going to forget my book. It's in the middle now. Judge, if I can have you in the center.